The milestone birthday galas for my grandfather Arthur Brown at the Aspen Luxury Resort were always designed for my family to flaunt a hollow wealth they had meticulously fabricated for the public eye. I am Miranda Brown, a 32-year-old woman who has spent the last decade building a quiet empire, while my relatives remained blissfully unaware of the power shifting beneath their feet. As I stood in the grand ballroom of the Little Nell, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive pine and the suffocating arrogance of my older sister. Candace had arrived draped in a custom designer gown worth several $1,000s, basking in the predatory glow of the crystal chandeliers as the family swarmed around her to celebrate her new position as a branch director at a local investment firm. My parents and cousins treated her like royalty, while they looked right through me, treating me as a mere charity case, who was lucky to even be invited to such an elite gathering. I moved quietly toward the buffet line, intending to grab a simple plate of food, but Candace stepped directly into my path with a look of pure disdain that twisted her expensive makeup. She didn't just block my way. She leaned in close enough for me to see the malice in her eyes before she spoke loudly enough for the nearby socialites to turn their heads. "Get away from my guests. Don't let your pathetic employees smell ruin their night." I didn't argue or cry, because I had long ago learned that words were useless against people who were blinded by their own vanity. I slowly placed my plate back on the marble table, pulled out my phone with a steady hand, and dialed a number that was about to turn this celebratory night into a forensic nightmare for everyone wearing the Brown name. Subscribe to my channel right now to witness how I executed a cold-blooded response that dismantled years of humiliation and stripped my family of everything they took for granted. My family has always operated based on an invisible but brutal metric regarding the value of the numbers in a bank account. This cold reality felt especially sharp tonight as I watched Dad and Mom weave through the crowd of the Aspen elite with practiced elegance. They spent the entire evening using flamboyant words to transform Candace into the absolute center of attention, while ignoring my presence entirely. Every time a wealthy business partner approached, Mom would lean in with a glowing smile to praise Candace's supposed brilliance in managing the family's latest luxury acquisitions. It was a carefully choreographed performance designed to cement my sister's status as the golden heir of the family legacy. Dad stood beside them with a look of immense pride that he had never once directed toward me during my years of quiet, hard work. Watching them manipulate the room made me realize how deeply the divide between us had grown over the years of silence. The hollow praise reminded me of the bitter winter 6 years ago when my world fundamentally shifted. I had approached my parents with a detailed proposal for a venture capital fund focused on high-risk but high-reward tech startups. Instead of the support, I expected they saw my ambition as a reckless betrayal of the traditional family stability they cherished so dearly. Dad had looked at me with such coldness that it felt like a physical blow when he declared they were cutting off every cent of my financial support. They wanted to punish my independence by leaving me with nothing in a city that demanded everything from those who wished to survive. That day marked the end of my childhood innocence and the beginning of a long, lonely struggle to prove my worth without their shadow. A sudden vibration in my pocket broke my train of thought and pulled me back to the suffocating heat of the ballroom. I glanced down to see a brief message from Sloane, my best friend since college, who knew every scar my family had ever inflicted. She reminded me in a few blunt words that I did not need to endure this toxic environment for even a single second longer than necessary. Her support was a stark contrast to the blood relatives who only saw me as a disappointing footnote in their grand narrative. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves because I knew the night was far from over. Candace noticed my brief hesitation and immediately seized the opportunity to exert her dominance under the guise of sisterly affection. She caught Mom's eye with a subtle nod before turning to me with a demanding smirk that made my skin crawl. With a sweet voice that masked her true intent, she pressured me into performing menial tasks like serving wine and retrieving her heavy coat in front of several high-profile investors. I felt the collective gaze of the room on me as I played the role of a glorified assistant for the woman who had stolen my place in the sun. Mom watched the entire exchange with an approving expression because she believed this public humiliation would teach me humility. I complied with a frozen smile on my face, while my mind began to process a much more dangerous set of facts I had recently uncovered. Earlier that morning, I had accidentally discovered a series of alarming irregularities in the way Candace was managing her personal and professional finances. While reviewing some shared digital records, I noticed she was using the company credit card to fund her extravagant lifestyle throughout our stay in Aspen. The receipts for luxury spa treatments and private designer consultations were hidden behind vague labels that did not match the business budget at all. It was a reckless display of greed that threatened the very stability our parents worked so hard to maintain for the public eye. My sister's desperation to maintain her image had finally led her to make a mistake that she could not easily erase. Before I could process the implications of my discovery, Harold, my older brother who usually stayed out of family drama, pulled me aside with a firm grip on my arm. He looked unusually tense as he warned me not to make any mistakes that could damage Candace's rising reputation. Our grandfather Arthur was watching the family's performance closely from afar, and any sign of scandal would ruin the succession plan Harold had spent years protecting. He made it clear that my only job was to stay quiet and play the part of the supportive younger sister regardless of the truth. I looked into his eyes and realized that in this family, the truth was always secondary to the preservation of a perfect, profitable image. 15 minutes after leaving that hypocritical banquet table, I stood alone on the balcony, looking down at the Aspen snow mountains sinking into darkness. The biting cold was a welcome relief compared to the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom where my family continued their hollow celebration. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number that remained hidden from everyone in this town. Desmond, my lead investment analyst who managed the core operations of my private corporation, answered on the second ring with his usual professional tone. I needed him to confirm the final steps of the acquisition process regarding the specific investment fund that Candace was currently managing. The transition had to be seamless because any delay would give her an opportunity to cover the tracks of her recent financial negligence. Desmond reported that my group had officially completed the buyout of that specific branch at precisely 5 o'clock last Friday afternoon. Although the paperwork was finalized, we had not yet made a public announcement to the employees or the board of directors. This gave me a tactical advantage that my sister could never have anticipated in her wildest dreams. I listened as he detailed the legal framework that now placed her entire professional future directly under my control. It was a strange sensation to realize that the person who had once helped cast me out was now unknowingly working for me. I felt a cold sense of clarity as I prepared to issue the orders that would change the trajectory of our family business forever. I immediately instructed the technical team to freeze all access to the branch's treasury funds to prevent any further unauthorized spending. Check the representation expenses for the past 3 months carefully, because I want to know every single cent Candace spent illegally. I told Desmond while watching the distant lights of the village. My sister had clearly mistaken the company's capital for her personal playground for far too long. The data Desmond began to share over the secure line revealed a series of significant financial shortfalls under her leadership. It was obvious that she had prioritized her social status over the fundamental health of the organization she was supposed to protect. I felt a deep disappointment realizing that she had fallen so far as to trade her professional integrity for a fake sense of glamour. The reports showed that the deficit was much deeper than the mere credit card abuse I had discovered earlier that morning. Desmond explained that several key accounts were nearly depleted because of a series of high-risk vanity projects that yielded no return. Candace had been gambling with the family's resources just to stay relevant among the elite circles of Aspen. Every word from my analyst confirmed that the golden child of the family was actually a liability waiting to explode. I knew that my parents would be devastated to learn the truth about their favorite daughter's incompetence. However, I was no longer interested in protecting the illusions that kept this family together at my expense. I took a moment to compose myself before giving the final set of instructions for the upcoming audit. Don't let anyone at that branch know I am the one behind this audit order until I appear there in person, I whispered into the phone. I wanted the element of surprise to be absolute when I finally confronted Candace with the evidence of her failures. Desmond confirmed the directive and promised that the freeze would be implemented within the hour without raising any immediate alarms. This silent takeover was the first step in a larger plan to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I ended the call and looked back toward the ballroom where the music was still playing. The darkness of the mountains seemed much less intimidating now that I held the power to dismantle my sister's carefully constructed world. At 2 o'clock in the morning in Aspen, as the freezing air began to seep into the room, I received the full audit report from Desmond. The digital document glowed against the darkness of my suite while revealing a truth that was even more scandalous than I had initially suspected. The report clearly indicated that Candace had secretly embezzled over $500,000 from the public fund to maintain her extravagant lifestyle. She had been funneling money through a web of shell companies to pay off massive personal debts incurred from failed private investments and luxury shopping sprees. Seeing the cold figures on the screen made my heart harden, because this was no longer just a matter of sibling rivalry. My sister had crossed a legal line that could potentially destroy the entire reputation of our family name if it ever reached the public ears. I sat there in the silence of the night while processing the absolute weight of the evidence I now held in my hands. The heavy silence was suddenly shattered when the door to my room swung open with a violent thud. Candace stumbled inside in a drunken state with her expensive dress disheveled and a glass of amber liquid still clutched in her hand. She looked at my laptop screen and began to laugh with a mocking tone that echoed off the cold walls. "You can stay up all night working for other people, Miranda, but you will never touch the director's chair I am sitting in," she sneered while leaning heavily against the mahogany desk. I stayed perfectly still and used the shadow of the lamp to hide the fact that I had just activated the voice recorder on my phone. She continued her tirade by bragging about how she knew exactly how to operate the system to get whatever she wanted without ever being caught. Her arrogance was so blinding that she didn't realize she was handing me the very confession I needed to finalize her downfall. Mom entered the room a few moments later with a concerned expression that was directed solely toward her golden daughter. Instead of reprimanding Candace for her intoxicated behavior, she turned to me with a demanding look that felt like a familiar sting. She told me that I needed to give up my heated bed for Candace because her sister needed proper rest to meet a high-profile partner tomorrow morning. According to Mom, my work was merely administrative while Candace was the face of the family's future success. I listened to this blatant display of blind favoritism without saying a single word for several long seconds. The rational part of my mind was disgusted by how they both viewed me as a disposable servant in their grand social theater. "You should be more worried about that chair than you are about my sleep, Candace," I finally said, with a voice that was eerily calm and devoid of any visible anger. My sister just rolled her eyes and slumped onto the edge of the bed, while Mom began to fuss over her like she was a fragile porcelain doll. The terrifying silence that followed my statement seemed to go unnoticed by them as they continued their self-absorbed drama. I watched Mom carefully tuck the blankets around the person who was actively stealing from our family's legacy. It was a surreal moment of clarity that confirmed I owed no loyalty to people who refused to see my value. I quietly gathered my laptop and moved toward the small armchair in the corner of the room without another word of protest. The rest of the night was spent in a state of hyper-focused preparation as I refined my plan for the coming days. I looked at the recording on my phone and felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that the power balance had shifted irrevocably. Candace's snores filled the room while I remained wide awake with the glowing numbers as my only companions. My parents had built a world on the foundation of Candace's perceived perfection, but that foundation was rotting from the inside out. I was no longer the girl who cried over unfair treatment because I had become the architect of my own justice. The dawn was still hours away, but the cold air no longer felt like a threat to my survival. At 8 o'clock the next morning, a luxurious black SUV pulled up directly in front of the Little Nell Resort entrance and immediately captured the attention of every guest nearby. The sleek vehicle looked out of place among the colorful ski gear of the tourists, but it perfectly matched the serious mission I had set in motion. Desmond stepped out of the car, followed by 3 assistants dressed in sharp business suits with leather portfolios tucked tightly under their arms. They moved with a level of professional precision that stood in stark contrast to the relaxed holiday atmosphere of the Aspen morning. I watched from a discreet distance as the team marched toward the grand lobby with the kind of authority that usually preceded a corporate takeover. Every step they took felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment my family's illusion would finally shatter beyond repair. Candace and my parents rushed out to greet the visitors because they mistakenly believed this delegation was from the parent company to finalize her promotion contract. Mom adjusted her pearl necklace while Dad wore his most welcoming business smile, as if he were already celebrating another victory for the family legacy. They had spent the entire morning bragging about how this meeting would solidify our status among the global elite. Candace stepped forward with a confident stride and reached out her hand to welcome Desmond as though she were the mistress of the house. The look of eager anticipation on her face was almost pathetic, given the reality of the documents hidden inside those leather portfolios. She began to offer a rehearsed speech about their shared vision for the company, but Desmond's cold demeanor quickly cut through her performance. Desmond ignored her outstretched hand and directly asked about the presence of the highest-ranking official currently on the premises. His voice was flat and professional as he scanned the room for someone who actually held legitimate legal authority over the Brown estate. My grandfather Arthur stepped out of the lounge area with a calm dignity to greet the newcomers, but Desmond remained unimpressed by the family's wealth. He stated firmly that he could only discuss the pending legal matters with the chairperson of the board of directors. This unexpected demand caused a ripple of confusion through the group because they were not prepared for such a rigid and formal encounter. My family had always managed their business through personal favors and social connections, rather than strict corporate protocols. Harold and his wife Martha, who had been standing quietly in the background, stepped forward to explain the current family hierarchy. Martha tried to use her most persuasive tone to insist that Candace was the most successful and capable member of the Brown family at this moment. She spoke about her sister-in-law's supposed achievements as if they were established facts that no one would dare to question. Harold nodded in agreement while trying to maintain a sense of calm during this increasingly awkward confrontation in the middle of the crowded lobby. They were desperately trying to protect the image of the golden child, while Desmond's team began to lay out a series of formal audit notifications on a nearby table. The tension in the room became almost physical as the staff and other guests began to notice the unfolding drama. I am not here to discuss anything with a branch manager who is currently on the list for immediate suspension, Desmond declared with a clarity that silenced the entire lobby. His words hit my family like a physical blow and left Candace standing there with her mouth slightly open in total shock. Mom looked like she was about to faint, while Dad's face turned a deep shade of red from a mixture of confusion and growing anger. They looked at each other as if searching for an explanation that none of them possessed in that moment of professional crisis. I decided it was finally time to step out from the shadows and take control of the situation I had carefully orchestrated from the beginning. "Desmond, you arrived earlier than I expected," I said while walking slowly toward the center of the stunned group with a calm smile. Every head in the room turned toward me with a look of absolute disbelief, as if they were seeing a ghost instead of the daughter they had ignored. My parents stared at me with wide eyes because they couldn't understand why a high-level corporate team would be answering to someone they had discarded years ago. I stood beside Desmond and felt the power shift completely as the realization began to dawn on my brother and grandfather. The game was no longer being played by their rules, and the numbers in those files were about to tell a story they could never ignore. At 10 o'clock, as the Aspen sun began to shine brightly over the snowy slopes, the entire truth started to unfold before the stunned eyes of my family. I walked down to the grand lobby with a steady pace that signaled the end of the psychological games we had played for years. Desmond immediately bowed his head in a show of absolute respect before handing me the leather portfolio containing the formal acquisition documents. Inside was the official termination notice for the branch manager position, with the signature of the parent corporation already in place. My family watched in silence as the man they had tried to impress just moments ago treated me like the most important person in the room. This was the moment I had envisioned during those long nights of building my empire while they were busy mocking my perceived failures. Candace collapsed onto a nearby velvet sofa when she finally realized that I was the actual owner of the corporation that bought her company 2 days ago. The color drained from her face as she looked from the legal documents in my hand to the cold expression on my face. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her as the sheer scale of her miscalculation became painfully apparent to everyone watching. My parents stood behind her with expressions of pure bewilderment because they could not reconcile this powerful version of me with the daughter they had discarded. The social standing they had worked so hard to maintain was evaporating in the heat of a corporate takeover they never saw coming. I felt no joy in her suffering, but I felt a profound sense of justice as the power balance shifted irrevocably. I looked at Desmond and gave him a sharp nod to signal that it was time to move to the next phase of our plan. I requested that he read the specific financial violations committed by Candace publicly in front of Arthur and all the guests present in the lobby. My grandfather watched with a grim expression as the details of the embezzlement and unauthorized spending were laid bare for the entire elite society to hear. Each number Desmond recited felt like another nail in the coffin of Candace's carefully constructed professional reputation. The whispers among the onlookers grew louder as they realized the golden heir of the Brown family was nothing more than a common thief. Harold and Martha stood frozen in their spots without being able to utter a single word of defense for the sister they had praised so recently. The realization that they had insulted the person who now held the financial destiny of the entire family was visible in their trembling hands. I stepped closer to Candace and held out my hand to demand the return of the corporate property she had been abusing for her personal vanity. Miss Brown, from this moment on, you are no longer an employee of our corporation, I declared with a voice that carried to every corner of the silent lobby. I directly confiscated the high-limit credit card and the keys to the luxury SUV that the corporation had originally provided for her professional use. I then informed her that she was required to leave the resort and the town of Aspen immediately because her presence was no longer authorized. The shock on her face was a testament to the fact that she had never considered a world where she was not the one in control. My parents tried to interject with pleas for family unity, but I silenced them with a single look that reminded them of the cold night they had cut my funding. Every one of your violations will be transferred to the legal department and the economic police this afternoon, I added, while turning my back on my sister's desperate sobs. The time for private negotiations and family favors had ended when she decided to gamble with the integrity of the business. I could see the guests pulling out their phones to record the scene, which ensured that this scandal would be known in every boardroom by sunset. The snowy mountains outside seemed even more beautiful now that the air inside the resort was finally clear of my family's lies. I walked toward the exit with Desmond and his team because my work in this town was officially finished. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the excitement of the birthday celebration had completely vanished, while a funeral atmosphere settled over those bearing the Brown name. The grand ballroom, which had been filled with laughter just hours ago, now felt like a cold tomb for their collective social ambitions. Candace approached me with tears streaming down her face and desperately begged me to withdraw the audit order before the police became involved. She claimed that she had only made those financial mistakes because of the immense pressure to maintain the family's high status. I looked at her trembling hands and refused her request flatly because of the deep psychological scars she had inflicted upon me for years. There was no room for mercy in my heart for a person who had spent her entire life trying to erase my existence. I watched her realization of total defeat with a cold detachment that surprised even my own legal team standing nearby. Dad stepped forward and tried to use his paternal authority to pressure me into saving the family honor from a public scandal. He spoke about our shared lineage as if that bond could somehow excuse the years of emotional neglect and financial abandonment I had suffered. I listened to his rehearsed speech about loyalty while realizing that he only valued me now because I held the keys to his continued comfort. I looked him directly in the eye and stated firmly that I no longer considered myself a part of his family or his legacy. My success was built on the ashes of the support he had withheld when I needed it most during my early career. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy with the weight of decades of unresolved resentment and unspoken truths. Mom began to sob uncontrollably and pleaded with me not to cut off the monthly allowance for their luxury mansion. She was horrified to learn that I had been the anonymous benefactor secretly paying their mortgage and bills for the past several years. Her grief was not for the loss of our relationship, but for the imminent loss of the opulent lifestyle she cherished above all else. I realized in that moment that my secret kindness had only enabled their blindness toward my true worth and capabilities. Blood cannot be an excuse for you to trample on me and then later beg for charity. I told her with a voice that was devoid of any remaining warmth. I felt a sense of liberation as I finally spoke the words that severed the invisible chains binding me to their expectations. I officially announced my intention to sell every asset related to the Brown family to recover the massive debts Candace had caused the corporation. This included the very properties they called home and the investments they relied upon for their daily social activities. I made it clear that I would not allow my corporation's resources to be drained by people who showed no professional integrity. My grandfather Arthur watched the proceedings with a grim silence as he realized the empire he built was being dismantled by the granddaughter he had ignored. Every legal document I signed was a step toward a future where I was no longer defined by their narrow-minded judgments. The name Brown was being erased from the ledger of my life with every stroke of my pen during that final meeting. My final action was to request the resort security to escort the entire Brown family out of Aspen immediately because they could no longer afford the bills. They had been living on the credit of a corporation that now viewed them as a high-risk liability with no remaining value. I watched as the security guards politely but firmly gathered their belongings and led them toward the exit of the Little Nell resort. The guests who had praised them earlier now turned their heads away to avoid being associated with their spectacular fall from grace. Today, the name Brown will no longer be associated with any of my success, I declared to the empty room as the last of them disappeared through the glass doors. I turned toward the window to look at the mountains and felt a profound sense of peace as I prepared to start my life anew. 1 month after the last snowstorms in Aspen vanished, I sat in my new office in Manhattan to look back at everything that had happened. The towering skyscrapers of the city offered a much more honest landscape than the deceptive beauty of the mountains where my family's secrets were finally exposed. I received a detailed update from my legal team regarding the criminal proceedings against the person who had once tried to ruin me. Candace was currently facing a suspended prison sentence and was forced to perform manual labor to repay her massive debts to the corporation after all her assets were seized. The designer clothes and luxury cars had been replaced by a reality of hard work and public humiliation that she could no longer escape through family connections. It was a stark reminder that the high-flying lifestyle she had built on the foundation of stolen funds was always destined to come crashing down. Harold and Martha had also experienced a dramatic fall from grace as they were forced to move into a tiny apartment in the suburbs. They were now living on meager pensions while facing total social isolation from the elite circles that used to praise their every move. The people who had once invited them to every exclusive gala in Aspen now looked the other way whenever their names were mentioned in conversation. Mom and Dad were struggling to adapt to a life without the anonymous financial support I had provided for so many years. They were finally experiencing the consequences of their blind favoritism and the coldness they had shown to the daughter who actually cared for their well-being. I felt no malice toward them anymore, but I also felt no obligation to return to a house that was never truly a home. While my former family struggled to survive in their new reality, I successfully executed another major merger in Chicago that solidified my position as the most powerful female chair in the investment world. My corporation continued to grow because it was built on a foundation of merit, hard work, and professional integrity, rather than social pretense. I realized that my true value never depended on the recognition of my parents or the approval of a sister who viewed me as a threat. The peace I felt in my heart came from knowing that I had built my empire through my own intelligence and resilience. Every challenge I faced in that cold resort town had only served to make me a more effective leader and a stronger woman. I was no longer seeking the love of people who were incapable of giving it without a hidden price tag. The fate of those who live on vanity is always a free fall when the mask of lies is finally stripped away before the light of truth. My family had spent their entire lives polishing an image that had no substance behind it, and now they were left with nothing but the empty echoes of their past glory. I understood that success is indeed the best form of revenge because it allows you to live a life that they can no longer reach or influence. Independence is a weapon that protects your self-respect from the insults of those who believe they can control your destiny through fear. I looked out at the Manhattan skyline and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had led me to this moment of absolute clarity. My story was no longer about a discarded daughter, but about a woman who had designed her own blueprint for freedom. Miranda's story is a powerful testament to the fact that success is the most effective way to reclaim your dignity from those who have wronged you. You should never let the prejudices of your family or the limitations of your background hold back your true potential in this world. Financial independence and self-respect are the essential tools that will help you stand firm against any form of humiliation or betrayal. Your worth is defined by your actions and your character, rather than the labels that others try to force upon you during your darkest moments. Thank you for listening to the story of the awakening and pride of Miranda Brown in the snowy mountains of Aspen. I truly appreciate your support, and I would love for you to share your views on how Miranda handled her family in the comments section below.
Trước khi kết thúc câu chuyện hôm nay, tôi muốn chúng ta cùng dừng lại một chút để suy nghĩ về hành trình của Miranda Brown. Đừng vội bỏ qua chi tiết này. Thực tế, cuộc sống đôi khi còn nghiệt ngã hơn cả thước phim. Quan điểm của tôi là thành công không phải là để trả thù mà là để khẳng định rằng vị trí định kiến mà người khác áp đặt lên bạn là hoàn toàn sai lầm. Trong một xã hội trọng vật chất như ở Mỹ, nếu bạn không tự xây dựng pháo đài, tài chính và lòng tự trọng cho chính mình, bạn sẽ mãi mãi là quân cờ trong trò chơi của kẻ khác, thậm chí là chính những người thân ruột thịt. Sự đoạt tiền của Miranda không phải là tàn nhẫn mà là sự giải thoát cần thiết để bảo vệ thành quả lao động chính đáng của cô ấy trong những kẻ chỉ biết ký sinh trên thành công của người khác. Nếu đặt mình vào vị trí của Miranda trong bữa tiệc tại Aspen ngày hôm đó, liệu bạn có đủ bản lĩnh để im lặng hành động hay sẽ chọn cách tranh cãi ngay lập tức? Cảm ơn các bạn đã lắng nghe câu chuyện tới tận giây phút cuối cùng này. Tôi rất trân trọng sự đồng hành của các bạn. Rất mong được đọc những quan điểm, bình luận sắc sảo của các bạn ngay bên dưới video. Hãy chia sẻ để chúng ta cùng rút ra những bài học giá trị cho bản thân nhé.